We're all in this together. A resilient community is not just a strong community. It is a community that can successfully adapt to changed circumstances. A community like New Orleans can be fundamentally changed by a disaster, but it can successfully adapt to those changes if its communities are given the right kinds of tools. As Katrina illustrates, even the most extensive government resources aren't always enough. And neighbors inside their communities are really the first responders, and we need to take advantage of this force multiplier. Because the chances are that the first person to knock on your door if a disaster strikes will not be the police or fire crew, but your neighbor asking if you're okay. They will know before outside rescue teams how a disaster has affected you. Ongoing two-way communications within the communities and between the communities and the first responders are vital for achieving real-time situational awareness, a common operating picture that provides true, actionable intelligence and ultimately results in a resilient community that successfully adapts even when disaster strikes. In addition to the work being funded by the Department of Homeland Security, there is congressional interest to support research and development into innovations in emergency communications, including broadband radio and the 911 system. House Bill 607 and Senate Bill 1040 provide authority and funding to develop a wireless public safety broadband network for first responders that is interoperable and disaster survivable, either connected to the internet or through local networks. Senate Bill 911 provides for resources to build a nationwide interoperable wireless public safety broadband network, and also to encourage advanced research and development into emerging wireless technologies. So what does this new paradigm in emergency communications look like? Well, it comes in two parts. Part one is connecting a community's citizens to each other for mutual aid and support by developing a local area emergency communications network. We are looking to leverage equipment that is already in the communities and not necessarily limited to radios and routers. Depending on the regional environmental risks, the network will also include advanced meteorological, geological, chemical, and biological sensors and trackers that monitor environmental factors as well as locate individuals. Part two is connecting the local area emergency communications network to rescue personnel outside the disaster area through a longer distance communications capability. This connectivity between the citizens inside the disaster area and the first responders outside results in real-time, actionable intelligence, especially in the first critical moments and hours of a disaster, saving more lives in the process. Our group is currently testing the longer distance portion of the emergency communications network and has successfully tested wireless broadband radio that can transmit up to 50 miles at 420 megahertz on a half watt of power. We believe that utilizing the amateur radio frequencies is the obvious choice, since they are dedicated to emergency communications use and are therefore not as vulnerable to overcrowding of airwaves during an emergency situation, which of course is what happens with landlines and cell phone service. Because we are using a UHF frequency, antenna size is not as much of an issue and therefore not as vulnerable to damage during a disaster. And of course, low power radio can continue operating using low power sources such as solar or battery, even when traditional sources of power are lost. To ensure the development of equipment and business rules that truly work in a disaster scenario, we articulated some basic planning assumptions to better inform our decision-making process and ensure that our solutions address the full range of possible challenges. Here is what we have identified so far. First of all, in a disaster, odds are that there will be no power, internet, or cell service, or at least don't plan on it. Also, every minute counts when lives are at stake, so whatever we develop has to be real-time and accessible to all who need it. The disaster will happen in someone's community, and those communities' neighbors will know before anyone else what the ground truth is in that disaster at that moment. So these neighbors need good communications integrated with each other and the first responders. Also, in these times of fiscal constraints, there are limited financial resources, both at the national and the local community levels. So whatever we come up with has to be already in the community or extremely cheap and easy to acquire ahead of time. Because there is most likely limited technical expertise within the communities, whatever we develop has to be easy to use. So applying this list of assumptions, we identified capabilities necessary for the equipment and processes to be relevant and effective in a disaster operation. And we'll conduct a gap analysis assessing the different types of equipment candidates against the necessary capabilities for feasible near-time solutions as well as more ideal long-term innovations. Some of the gap analysis will be based on original experimentation and some on a review of the literature of other developers' experiences. For example, the details in the Oklahoma City experience with packet radios versus broadband radio brought a detailed start point for consideration of first responder communications requirements, such as the need for photos, input fingerprints, file reports, and access to public safety databases while in the field. We have 2 videos on YouTube of our ongoing experimentation with low-power, long-distance transmission of broadband video and data. We also have some historically illustrative examples of situational awareness. You can find these videos by going into YouTube and typing W3JAG into the search box. The next phase of our work is the community-level communications. In addition to selecting equipment for testing, we are talking to some nearby communities to help us experiment. In this way, we can work through not only the equipment, but also the business rules for how this would come together at the community level. And in geographic regions that are particularly fragile or prone to dangerous conditions, we are looking at integrating alert sensors and trackers tailored to those regional risks. I got an email from a gentleman in Vietnam who saw our YouTube videos. He wrote asking if we could test our equipment in his country. He is very concerned because of the natural geography of Vietnam, with its long coastline open to the sea, making tsunamis a real danger. The lower Mekong Delta, he writes, is also prone to much flooding. But most distressing, according to him, is the central part of the country. According to this man, hydropower plants have been built on the rivers, which are junctions of tectonic plates. The power plants put a lot of pressure on these tectonic plates, and it's causing earthquakes. He writes, "These issues are really dangerous, as the villagers around are now really worried when they can feel the earthquakes. Moreover, these hydropower plants are built with really bad quality and bad design. At the moment, I do think that there will be a big disaster for the villagers around these areas without any preparation. In those dangerous areas, I think we can utilize your equipment to save human lives." The presentations at this conference have addressed many of the technologies that would be extremely applicable to our work, such as the APRS YAC, which can be decoupled from the internet and form the basis of a common operating picture. Other presentations were especially intriguing for their work with mesh networks and situational awareness. We hope to link up with these innovative thinkers to help us with our work. Anyway, there's much to be done and many people that can be helped if we can get this right. Thank you for your time and interest.